heroes and dealing with the sins of the past. I've been thinking about this for some time. It's easy to throw away R. Kelly. Now, if we're being honest, it's really easy to throw away R. Kelly. I like his music.
Super easy for me. Super easy for me.
I can throw you away. Bill Cosby at this point, he's become a caricature of himself. It's kind of easy to throw him away.
Yeah.
I think about somebody like Martin Luther King Jr. though. And that's when it gets a little bit more complicated, right? Because Martin Luther King, like, he's basically the Frederick Douglass of the 20th century, right? He's considered one of the greatest orators of and within American history. Some would even say world history.
Yeah,
I personally think
he's more Frederick Douglass than. He's more Frederick Douglass than Frederick Douglass because he's known around the world.
Frederick Douglass was known around the world at his time as well.
At his time, yes.
But I was going to argue Malcolm X, I think, is a better speaker than Martin Luther King. He has a better cadence. But back to what we were talking about, back in 2019, there were FBI surveillance tapes and information that was released. And if you don't know, the FBI was relentless in pursuing King, tapping his hotel rooms, tapping his phones, just however they could spy on him, they were spying on him. They had informants all throughout the SCLC. And so they had a lot
and
of
calling him. And calling him, like calling his house, trying to get him to kill himself and harassing his family, Yeah, that was going on.
I guess we could bring in the FBI in as another institution, because a lot of people have this faith in the FBI, and they've been a corrupt organization, especially during the civil rights movement. At least we forget the assassination of Fred Hampton.
Which I have to bring up. I'm so glad we're doing this podcast from abroad right now. I feel really like a lot safer talking about the FBI from a half a planet away. You know what I mean? They talk all kinds of shit. Yeah,
they can't touch us over here, can they?
The CIA is awesome, by the way. I love the CIA. They are a quality organization.
Nothing but good things to say about them.
Great people doing their best. Yeah, we're going to be doing a podcast from the moon. And another thing about the CIA, but NASA is amazing.
Stay tuned in about 5 to 10 minutes when we talk about Ronald Reagan. But it's King learning about the cheating. I think a lot of people have known about that for some time. I be honest with you, I don't care about that. It's men cheat. They always have, always will. It's a thing. Monogamy doesn't work. We want it to work. It's a choice that you have to make. Not everyone has the discipline to stay consistent in making that choice. And of course, like Chris Rock said, a man is only as loyal as his as his options. As faithful. He's only as faithful. Yeah. As his options.
King had a lot of options, man. He was young. You don't think of him as a sex symbol, but you think about young, he could talk, great orator. Apparently he could shoot some pool. Mm-hmm. Apparently he was funny, all that stuff. Charisma, fame, some options, man. And that's, we don't like to think of it that way.
He had mistresses, apparently. He slept with a lot of women. Apparently there's some flack he would have gotten at that time, because some of those, women were, not black, apparently. So, people, of course, would have been mad about that. But I think
But also, isn't that part of his message? Wasn't that part of his message as well?
It's all a part of his message. That's the one, especially the one the conservatives love to talk about. Judge on the content of the character, right? Judge someone on the content of the character. Your character is good enough.
What does that mean in that context? The content of their what? Character, sir. Get your mind out of the gutter.
But at the same time, there was a report came out that, you know, he witnessed and laughed as, you know, his friend who the FBI was investigating at the time for his communist ties, you know, was raping his own parishioner. And then King stood by and laughed as it was happening. And reading that report, this was big news back in 2019. And I believe his friend was, let me get his name so people can go look it up. I believe his friend's name was Logan Curse. He was a Baltimore pastor. And he was also being investigated the FBI was also looking into Stanley Levinson because he was a Communist Party member. And that was one of the reasons, you know, that was the good justification for the FBI having so much surveillance on King, was the fact that, you know, he had ties to these people that were part of these communist organizations. But really, it was just, it was a fishing mission to try and get as much information about King's private life to try and damage his public profile. But this would have been one that would have damaged it, right? You know,
yeah.
And to this day, you know, going back and looking into this and looking into some of the things, you know, King did, it's hard to look at him the same way, but I've learned a long time ago never to look at people that way. Like I don't, I value Muhammad Ali for the actions that he did that brought a lot of value to the world. I know he was a flawed man. I know he wasn't perfect. You know, I look at King the same way. You know, there was a lot of, what was his overall intention? You know, what was his overall goal? Because those tapes also show that he was focused. He was committed to the movement. He was focused on the movement. He was trying to make the country better for African Americans, and through that, through all Americans. Right?
Yeah, I mean, and the march wasn't a march about his marriage. It wasn't. We weren't marching for his marriage. His focus was, I mean, which is not to excuse the things, his infidelity, and especially not, you know, if he was watching someone, you know, sexually assault someone, you know, but he's known for, what he's known for, you know, he was able to achieve, you know, to some degree.
Yeah. And there's a lot of speculation on whether that allegation is 100% true or not. I would have to go and actually listen to the tape myself. This was just reported by a King's autobiographer. But at the same time, context and nuance, context and nuance, context and nuance. Every one of your heroes has done something that they would not be proud of, and you would not be proud of. And it does go to show that we have this concept of perfection that we try to put on people, and perhaps we're going to set ourselves up for disappointment if we keep doing that. Now, that's not to say that we shouldn't judge someone critically for these types of actions, despite the fact that this happened in the 60s, in a time where, you know, a lot of women experienced that type of behavior, and there was no justice that they were given when they experienced this type of behavior. Workplace harassment was a norm during this time as well.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean while we can't judge someone by today's standards, you know, like King said, you know, there's a moral arc of the universe.
Yeah.
Right?
And it bends towards justice.
Yeah, it bends towards justice. And sometimes we can help it along the way.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'll say, just to go along with what you're saying, also, I think what happens, especially with Black folks, you know, like a lot of the people who defended people like, say, like R. Kelly, of course, you know, Dr. King has a place in our hearts. And I think this really speaks to one of the reasons why racism has to be completely dismantled. Because what happens is, you know, when people like Bill Cosby, you know, what happened with Bill Cosby, for example, right? One of the defenses, he was looking to buy NBC, and they're trying to stop a Black man from from having this kind of power in the media, right? So there is a knee-jerk reaction on the part of Black folks. Like, we don't want to see these people get attacked, right? Because when we see it, it becomes attached to so many other things, so many other racist structures and attitudes. So that becomes like a very knee-jerk reaction. Hey, what are you trying to do, right? Because that does exist. Patrice O'Neal had a great bit about Barack Obama, and I'll paraphrase. But basically, like, if it wasn't for people being so racist, right, we could be more critical of people like Obama. We could be even more critical of people like R. Kelly, of Bill Cosby, of MLK, right? But because of racism, right, we feel this like, this feels like, you know, or even the fact that, yeah, like maybe it is true. Maybe if R. Kelly were raping, you know, 14-year-old white girls, he would have been in jail a long ass time ago, you know? And so because those things exist, you know, it creates a situation where we are more likely to circle the wagons and maybe defend somebody that shouldn't be, you know, because not every Black person is a freedom fighter. You know, we're not all perfect. You know, none of us are perfect. And all these heroes are flawed. All these people are flawed. But when we have all these other things that we have to fight against, you know, it creates a situation where we are going to be more likely to. So just end racism, and then we can all look at this stuff. If you're a conservative, if anybody out there is a white conservative listening to our podcast, I would ask, if you are truly a conservative, like a fiscal conservative, socially conservative, and not a racist, then maybe be a little bit more critical of racist conservatives, of people that are using conservatism, the brand, as a way of making excuses for their racism. Because what happens is, you know, there might be a lot of Black conservatives out there. There are maybe a lot of people that could really get with what you're saying about the economy or about social conservatism, right? And you still have a few. You got your Candace Owenses. You got all these people. Like, not me. I'm just saying there are people out there that might agree with you. But because all these things are bound up in racism and white supremacy, you know, we reject it. You know, I reject it for a lot of reasons. But you can get some people on your side if you stop being so damn racist, you know?
Exactly, you would. Like, you talked about criticizing, you know, your heroes, or those that have status, or those that people admire. I have no problems criticizing King. Like I said, I'm more of a Malcolm X type of dude. I believe Malcolm X, you know, had a better idea of how to deal with the situation. And if you listen, and this is the thing, conservatives only, I wouldn't say conservatives, but people with ill intentions only quote King from the "I Have a Dream" speech. They only quote that King. They don't they don't quote the speech he gave and Selma. They don't quote the mountaintop speech. They don't quote the numerous writings he did about the Vietnam War and about the economic capitalism of Black people, how he criticized Chicago and the public housing in Chicago, how he talked about how some of the conditions Black people lived in northern states were worse than the conditions that Black people experienced in the South.
Say that.
None of that.
Yes.
None of it.
None of it. Conversely, and this is where you get kind of a sandwich, right? So they only quote King from, you know, well, little Black boys and little white boys and girls can sit together. I shouldn't be doing that, right? But they only quote like these kinds of content of your character, not the color of your skin. And a lot of conservatives will use that to combat critiques of whiteness and white privilege. Like, hey, I'm not a white person. I'm just a person all of a sudden, right?
Yeah.
So with King, they'll only quote from back then. With Malcolm X, they will only quote like, you know, white people are the devil, and, you know, like the earlier, you know, but when he came back from Mecca, right, and he saw that well, you know what? This seems to be a problem with capitalism. This seems to be a problem, not so much of skin color, but it seems to be like a societal sickness. And a lot has to do with economics. You know, they won't quote any of that either, because that's when he's really dangerous. And also, that's when he got smoked.